So hi, welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Real Estate for Real People. Tamara and I are really looking forward to sitting down with our guest today. So we are going to be talking with Murray Klingbeil from AmeriSpec Homes. So he's a local home inspector here. Murray, you've been doing home inspecting homes for a long time. How many years?
Well, I've been at it 30 years. So 1992 is when I started.
Wow.
And that was over 11,000 inspections ago.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I know when I got in the business in, a few years later, 1995, and our mom and dad were still selling homes at that time. And they said, this is the only home inspector you're going to need. Like, this is the guy. And you're still the guy.
It's been an honor working with your family for 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing.
That's pretty special.
That's pretty neat.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Let's delve right in and talk about the ins and outs. I mean, I think first of all, it's really nice that we're back to a more calm market, a less frenzied pace where you can actually get a home inspection again.
And people are wanting home inspections again. And we love that because you want and encourage people to get a home inspection. I mean, you need to know a home.
Of course you do. And I feel sorry for many of the people that were forced into those no subject sales and they couldn't get a home inspection should they want to. Yeah. And many of them now are finding all the problems that they sure wish they knew about beforehand.
I know.
Do you ever get called back, Murray? I mean, it's interesting because we certainly had clients. We had listings that had, 10, 15 offers. There weren't any inspections done. We also had buyers who would come in and purchase a home, one of 15 offers, and they couldn't have done an inspection. Does anybody get you to come back after the fact? They own the home and...
Yes, they do. And
would be a good idea.
It is because, I mean, how often do people look in their attic? And that's where the mold is. That's where the ex-grow-up was. That's where the rats are living.
Yes.
And, it's just so many things, so many landmines that they can step on when you're buying an older home.
Wow.
And the older it is, the more problems you're going to have.
So let's jump in and talk about that a little bit. So Kelowna, I mean, we have houses that are here for a lot of our listeners that aren't from the Okanagan area. We get lots of people coming from Vancouver and Toronto, and it's, it's different there than it is here. And we do have houses that are built in the 40s and the 50s. And what are some things for people to look for in those? I mean, we've got some houses that are built even earlier than that.
We just sold one that was built before 1900, so.
Yes. But the majority of the housing stock in the Okanagan is relatively young compared to other parts of the country.
Absolutely.
We're spoiled here. Like you've got your pockets of 1940s houses after World War II. There's the odd plantation or orchardist house that can be easily over 100 years old. Yeah. But the majority of our housing stock is relatively new. And fortunately, we have so many really good contractors here in town. So I
love that. That's nice to hear. And you're right. We do. We have
particularly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when it's the European craftsmen that came over. The houses like Lombardy Square, all of that 60s is my favorite stock of house.
Wow,
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I love that.
They're square. The masonry work is excellent from the Italians, and they're really well built.
Wow.
And now something to watch for, just as realtors that we're aware of, is going into some of the houses of an older vintage that has asbestos.
Yes.
So, and that's something that you kind of red flags for you, or?
The rules now are, according to WorkSafe BC, any house built from 1990 to the beginning of time can have asbestos content in it somewhere. So there's over 2,000 building materials that contain asbestos. It's a wonderful building product, all except for that cancer stuff.
Right.
So in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and in my humble experience, petered out in the early 80s. But WorkSafe BC raised the bar just for everybody's protection.
Yeah.
But your usual culprits are drywall compound, textured ceilings, ceiling tiles, insulation on heating ducts, insulation.
That's the big one we hear about, right? The tape that goes around the furnace ducts.
Yeah, and then the most expensive one is the vermiculite insulation that can be in the attics or the walls.
Right.
And a 1,000 square foot house is going to be somewhere around the $15,000 range to have that material remediated.
Okay, that was going to be on my next question. Now, we've had houses before where we've negotiated or been in negotiating an offer on, and it has asbestos in the drywall, in the flooring, in, and so do you recommend to remove all of that, or is it still the same thing? As long as you're not touching it, it's okay.
That's the golden rule.
Yeah.
Perfectly harmless if it's left undisturbed. But I would like to say up until probably 3 or 4 years ago, probably 80% of all house renovations are done with no permits.
Correct.
Now,
Right.
when you go to do a renovation on a house that's 1990 or older, as part of your building permit process, you have to get a risk report for any contractor that's going to come in your house. So they have to come and sample the materials in the area where you're going to do your renovation. And if it has asbestos content, the dollar signs start increasing big.
Yeah.
So now,
Right.
instead of 80%, it's probably 90% of the buildings that are done with no permits.
Wow. Oh, interesting. The effect that had.
Much
Yeah.
more money, right?
Well, and
Of
I know,
course.
we're going in houses all the time, and we often, of course, we always ask somebody, you did some work here, we can see you renovated. Did you get a permit for that? Nope, did it myself.
Yep.
And, a lot of them, I think the standard thing people say, well, I didn't need a permit. All I was doing was knocking out a wall. All I did was expand the kitchen. All I did
I didn't
was
move electrical, so I'm okay.
We hear it a lot.
You would be surprised at how little needs to be done that requires a permit.
Interesting. Like what?
One partition wall that you install in a basement needs a permit.
Okay.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's
So everything really needs
Pretty
a
much.
permit.
Yeah, pretty much everything.
So that's good. Good rule of thumb.
Good for
to use.
us to know. Tell us if you had to say what the top 3 scariest things are in home inspections, top big warning flags that you would see.
sure. Number one, the worst enemy of any house or structure next to fire is water.
Right.
So Mother Nature is always trying to take her raw materials back. So she's slowly digesting your house, your car, our bodies.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
can keep a good roof on it, keep it well sided and keep it well painted. And if you're in a dry area, houses last centuries, as you can see in Europe.
Right.
Right.
But she's beating it to death with her termites, her carpenter ants, the wind, the freeze-thaw process. So all of that requires regular maintenance. And if people take care of their house, it lasts a long time.
Yeah.
So the biggest things that you can find, number one, is always major structural issues.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, we're so fortunate here because the majority of our building soil substrate is good here. We're granite, we're heavy gravel crush. There is some sections of town that have some expansive clay soil that can be tough on foundations. So that would be your number one. The number 2 most expensive thing that you're going to run into is soil contamination from a leaking underground fuel oil storage tank.
Okay.
Right,
And
okay.
Do we have a lot of that in Kelowna? I mean, I don't hear about a lot of it, but maybe we're just, they go out in the night and
Well,
take it away.
Well, and they do sometimes.
Yeah.
But any house in the valley that is, call it 60 years old or older, many of those neighborhoods had no natural gas.
Right.
So if the house was forced air heat, 9 times out of 10, it was fuel oil. And 50% of the time, the oil tank was above ground and it was just hauled away and it's gone. But they're ugly, so people bury them. And then when
Right.
you do switch to natural gas, the process, you're supposed to get a permit. So they pump the tank dry, fill it with sand so it doesn't collapse over time. That's the way it's supposed to be done. But even if it's done correctly, now the insurance companies want the tank gone. So it still
Wow.
requires
Yeah.
excavation and removal, and you got to get a permit for that.
Wow.
So that can easily be $4,000 to $5,000 just to get.
And
it.
how do people know?
Yeah, I was
Sorry.
going to say, can you tell, Murray, that there's you can see? I remember in some houses that you've inspected for me that you'd say, there are lines going from the mechanical room outside. I suspect there was an underground tank.
Correct. Then the next step is you hire a company that's got the technological
Sonar,
equipment.
right?
Right. Ground penetrating radar. And so it's very accurate as long as they can pass the machine over where the tank is. But often they're buried under the deck and he can't get his machine on there. Or they're covered in vegetation that's been planted.
Right.
And as a general rule of thumb, they bury the tank where it's easiest for the guy to come fill it with the truck.
Yeah.
So
Right.
take a look where the driveway is, and that's primarily where they're located.
And how many times do you see a house that has a tank or has remnants of a signs?
Or contaminated soil.
Well, again, you're going back to.
Do you have 3 hours, by the way? Just
I can keep you guys here for weeks, to be honest with you.
This is good.
But once that ground penetrating radar finds the tank, then they can pull the cap and see if it's been properly decommissioned. And let's hope it is.
Right.
And if it isn't, if it's empty, because over time, nobody abandons their oil furnace with a full tank of oil. So it's usually empty. So there's lots of room for condensation that rots the bottom of the tank, and then all the oil leaches into the soil.
Wow.
So part of the process, when you get your permit to have it removed, a representative from Environment Canada comes and hops in the hole and takes a sample. And you better hope that it's not contaminated.
Wow.
Because now it's all got to be professionally remediated, dug up, hauled away to the proper site.
It can leach into neighboring properties as well.
Yes. My worst one was a property on Ethel, one of the old heritage houses, leaked into both neighbors because of the high water table.
Yes.
And it was $300,000 to do the remediation.
Oh my, wow.
Wow. And there would be of course, there's no insurance against something like that. And you can't delay that. I mean, once it's discovered,
that's it.
Something that needs to be dealt with. Wow. Something to really think about when you're purchasing an older home.
Yeah. And like I say, if the neighborhood has had gas, like primarily most of the city had natural gas in the 60s. But any of your outlying areas,
right.
Your farms, orchards, all of that, but there's no gas, you had two options, electric or oil. And oil was considerably cheaper than.
Right.
Well, we still see that. There are neighborhoods in, perhaps not right in central Kelowna itself, but areas out on the outskirts where there isn't natural gas and they've got propane.
Yeah.
But they're above ground, and I know they're regulated and inspected and so on.
That's right.
Propane is a non-issue. I have it at my own house.
Interesting.
Yeah, I live on an acreage with no natural
Yeah.
gas.
Yeah. So it's just those underground oil tanks. Okay. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's the big one.
And what's another? Because you've said two. I think you said there's three.
Well, the other one that is devastating is grow-ops.
Yes. And let's talk about that. If we can, because we don't see a huge amount of them, but we've certainly got them. I wonder what the difference is going to be, or how it will affect things now that people can legally have a grow up. And I know they're really hard to get financing on, and love to hear and insurance.
Yeah. And you bring up an excellent point. Back some years ago, before the legalization of marijuana, a grow-op was a kiss of death to anybody trying to sell a house.
Yeah.
For that very reason, unless you're paying cash or 50% down, and then you got to go see the leg breaker for your 13% mortgage, you couldn't get financing.
Yeah.
And nobody told the bad guys that it's not a grow-op anymore. So the insurance companies are afraid of it because somebody can come kick in that door in the middle of the night.
Of course.
So they were bad. But now that it's legal and everybody can have a certain amount of plants legally, where do you draw the line?
And that's it. And do you find a huge significant amount of moisture in those properties? Is it?
Some.
Yeah.
If the guys really know what they're doing, it does zero damage to the house.
Okay.
So they basically build a room in the basement. It's framed. It's all tightly sealed. And then the favorite trick is they take the toilet off the mount in the basement and vent everything in the sewer.
Wow.
So it does zero damage to the house other than the electrical alterations.
Yeah.
Right.
Where they steal the power upstream of the meter. And then they conceal that. So you have to watch for shoddy drywall repairs where your overhead service mast comes in, where the classic 1970s Rutland split level entry with the overhead service lateral is the easiest ones to steal power because they can cut a hole in the wall beside the fireplace to get to the pipe. And now you don't call the power guys and say, can you turn the power off so I can tap in? So they take a grinder and they grind that pipe, split it open like a sardine can. use a blowtorch to melt all the insulation off of the wires, and then whoever drew the short straw on the crew has to attach.
Oh my
the
gosh.
alligator.
Really?
Dead serious.
And how many of these
Crazy.
do you see, Murray?
Much less than before.
Right, because we used to see a lot of them. I
Well, you'd
know
walk
you had
through a
educated
house.
me about how to,
Yeah.
what to look for.
Yeah, I would say the height of it was probably the mid 2000s,
Yes.
2004, 5, 6. That's when
That was the peak.
good old BC bud was worth as much as cocaine, pound for pound.
Wow.
There was huge money in it. So, I mean, people would rent $1 million houses and turn them into a big old grow up.
Well, I remember, Tamara, going through a few back then, and it was crazy. You'd see the devastation that would be left afterwards. And, all the little, remember the staples in the ceiling for them to, tarp
carpet
everything
cut
out.
out.
And
Or the dirt just put right on top of the carpet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the poor landlord that was unaware of it, now, once it gets busted,
It's forever stigmatized.
Yeah.
It's forever got the label that it was a grow up, even if it's fully remediated.
yeah,
and the
always.
professional remediation is so expensive.
Right.
So those are your big ones.
Wow.
And, the usual is particularly the older houses in town that were most affordable for first-time buyers. Well, it's changed hands 10 or 12 times. Everybody's renovated it. Nobody's an electrician. Nobody's a
Yes.
plumber.
Yes.
Those kind of things.
Right.
Other relatively expensive issues are termite
Yeah.
infestation.
Right. And I didn't know that we had termites in the Okanagan.
Neither did I till I moved here.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not talked about much,
And is-
understandably. No
is
one
it
wants to
quite
admit, but
Bad, the termites that we have here, or?
Depends what neighborhood you're in.
And it's sort of, if I got this right, and I think you told me this before, termites, they sort of follow a path, right? Sort of like ants. They kind of, is that right?
Well, termites don't live in your house. Termites
Right.
live in an underground colony. The termites we have here are subterranean termites. So they only come to your house to forage for cellulose. They want your wall studs. They want your cardboard boxes that are on the ground. They want the cardboard skin on your drywall. Anything that's cellulose. So it's the workers that do the damage to the house. They consume that cellulose and they go back to the nest, regurgitate it to feed the little ones.
wow.
Okay.
And you can tell that there are termites in a house. How?
Yeah, good
The
question.
number one thing that you're looking for is shelter tubes. So a termite dies when it's exposed to the atmosphere.
Okay.
Termite is about the same size and color as a grain of rice. Okay.
Okay.
So when they're underground and they butt up against your foundation, now they've got to cross that 6 inches of foundation to get to the wood. They build shelter tubes. So from
Wow.
their saliva, their excrement, and whatever building materials they can get, they build these tubes. It looks like the inside of a crunchy bar. And so
Yeah.
when you find an active...
I don't know that I can eat a crunchy bar ever again now. You wrecked it for me. Part of me is thanking you.
But if you find that shelter tube and you break it open, if it's active, you'll see them coming and going like a
Really?
highway.
And how big are the shelter tubes often? I feel like I've seen that before.
No, I don't know, but my
They're
skin is
about
crawling.
the size of one of these mic stands.
Wow.
So they're that wide.
Oh, yeah.
And if you opened it up and it was active, would there be full of?
Well, there's some coming and some going.
Oh my gosh, that's so gross.
And but
Good to know, though. Everybody listening, go home today and walk around the perimeter of your house or inside.
wherever there's exposed foundation. And the other thing
Right.
you want to look for is wings from the swarmers. Okay, so there's a couple of times a year where they swarm to start new colonies. And so they leave behind, usually the number one spot that I find them is in the utility room around the water heater.
Yeah.
Because another famous entry point is where the slab meets the foundation wall.
Yeah.
That's where they can come out. And they like the heat of the water heater if it's gas fired.
I've heard that. I knew that one, to look on top of a hot water
Yeah.
heater, I was always told.
And freezers. Okay, so the freezer's
Oh.
downstairs and the compressor
Yeah.
generates vibration and heat. It's another spot that's a favorite for them.
Okay, good to know.
Wow.
Now, before we run out of time here, so a lot of the things we've been talking about apply to single-family detached housing. Let's jump over for a moment, if we can, to condos. We're sitting in a beautiful new condo.
Beautiful new one.
Yeah, so this one's probably fine.
Yeah, this one will be
fine.
depending on how good the engineers were at putting the foundations in, as we know from
Yes.
the
Right.
street.
Yes.
But no, this thing will be beautiful. It would have passed all the municipal building inspectors before anybody got their occupancy permit.
Right.
And new construction of this quality, very few problems.
Okay.
However, going back some years, there's certain building materials that were a really good idea at the time that turned
Yeah.
out to not be so good.
Right.
Right.
And the one that you have to watch for in condos, which ran from 1995 to 2008,
Oh, wow.
is they were plumbed with a material called Kitec,
Yeah.
Kitec.
Right.
And so the primary problem there is the fittings were built poorly. They used way too much zinc and not enough brass and copper. So the fittings dissolve over time.
Wow.
And they get like Swiss cheese and they burst and they leak.
And that's interior of the building, so that could leak anywhere in the building.
Anywhere.
And so what are the ages of that again?
From 1995 to 2008.
Wow.
Okay, good to know.
It's easily spotted if you know what to look for.
And so what do
Wow.
we look for?
Okay, you're going to look for color of the pipe and you're going to look for markings on the fittings. So
Right.
if you have orange piping on the hot side,
Yes.
it's Kitec.
Ah,
If you have robin's egg blue and it's stamped right on it, Kitec.
I've seen it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And so when this is discovered, insurance companies don't like it. They're wanting all of it to be replaced. Have I got that correct?
It depends on the history of the building. Like anything, some production runs are better than others. Some have never had an issue. Others have had numerous catastrophic floods, can't get insurance anymore. Building must be replumbed.
Wow.
Wow.
So
At significant cost. We were talking before we started filming of
Yes.
$15,000 assessments
Yes.
per unit, per door.
yes.
Wow. Yeah, really, it makes you realize and understand the importance of having a reliable, reputable, honest home inspector come and check all of this out.
It's a pretty good idea, that's for sure.
Well, and there's so many things. I mean, really, I think we're going to have you come back onto the show so we can talk
should
about
do
all
a
these
part
other
two.
things.
Actually, would be great. Let's do another one.
There's so
And
many
have you talk
things.
about all the things we didn't get to talk about today.
So quickly before we finish up, because we are running out of time, and I'm sorry because this has been quick. But if you were to give advice to a buyer, your top 3 things of advice, what would they be?
Talk to the neighbor.
I love that.
So does the septic system need to be pumped out every month? Did the Harley riders used to wash their motorcycle parts with gasoline in the kitchen sink? Was it a beat to death rental forever? Was it a grow op?
Wow.
Yeah, so
Talk
smart.
to the neighbor. That is genius because I think people rarely ever speak to a neighbor until they
true.
move in.
Yeah.
And then the neighbor
they
comes
go over.
racing over to go, by the way, this was a grow up and nobody disclosed things. So
Exactly. And if you can find out who the matriarch of the neighborhood that's been there forever, they can tell you, oh yeah, I remember Bob put a new roof on there 12 years ago or whatever. But they're a wealth of information.
Absolutely. Yeah, great
Brilliant.
advice. Yeah, great advice. Anything else? For those buyers, talk to the neighbor is a great one.
I love that.
Well, take a good walk through the house when you're looking at it and bring a flashlight and check inside closets. Okay. If the house has had major foundation issues, everybody patches the cracks you see. Nobody patches in the closets. That's also where the about 8 to 10 inch roughly cut in ceiling hole for venting the grow op will be.
Wow.
So you'll
Right.
be able to see the terrible patch job. And it's just take a really good look for structural issues and grow up.
I love
In the
that.
closet. I love that.
Well, Dad, back when I got into the business, and our dad's little trick was to get a marble. And when you're out showing houses, you always kept a marble in your pocket. Put it on the counter, put it on the floor, and see how level things are. Now our agents, typically when they're out showing, will also keep a measuring tool, laser tool or what have you, to verify measurements. But a flashlight, add that to your toolkit.
Yeah.
And everybody's got one on their phone.
It's so true.
It's so
and
true.
just to walk in and
And have a good look at all the things that might be hidden.
Yeah. And that's where the mold is.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah,
you're
we
not-
didn't even get to talk about that.
No.
Another time.
We'll have you back, Murray.
We will.
Thank you
That was
again
amazing.
so
My pleasure.
much. So what is your website? So we're going to link all of it below. But
AmeriSpec.ca, Okanagan.
beautiful.
Okay. And people can find you on there and book home inspections. And Murray,
we're here
thank
anytime.
you.
Yeah,
This was
that was
amazing.
fantastic
So if
and
you are looking for a
informative.
home inspector, contact Murray Klingbeil. He has done amazing work for lots of our clients. So.
Over how many did you say?
Over 11,000.
11,000
home inspections.
And we're
That's
doing this
good.
over 30 years. So I think that says it all.
Thank you
you,
so
ladies.
much. And thank you
Thank
for
you.
listening.